Hey, what's going on? I'm Jeremy, and wrestling is terrible. And this week, Tristan Glover of Martial Arts Film Freak and myself, we're going to talk a little bit about this docuseries that came out on Netflix maybe last week at the time we were recording this. It's called The Wrestlers. And I thought it was a really cool way to explain to casual audiences what the fundamentals of wrestling are, the emotional journey side of it, the way that it resonates with certain people that are participating in the sport. It dives a little bit into the way that matches are booked and the way that they're structured. It shows a little bit of like the production behind the scenes stuff, and it introduces us to a lot of kind of underdog wrestlers. And I thought it had a really good emotional arc to it. But before we kind of get into the review side of it, Tristan, like, did you know anything about OVW before this?
My knowledge of OVW stems from most probably wrestling fans, and that is they talk about it at the beginning of the first episode. The rich class of wrestlers who came out of OVW in the 2000s, early 2000s specifically. The graduating class of OVW in like 2002 consisted
Crazy.
of Brock Lesnar, Randy Orton, John Cena, and Shelton Benjamin. Just
So, I mean,
an
come on.
amazing class of guys.
Oh, crap.
Like I know that they were a I guess a training ground that worked with WWE. WWE had a partnership with them in that time of like, hey, we're gonna send you guys, develop them, get them ready for TV, and send them back to us.
It is wild. Like, what a just class A talent. What happened to OVW between 2002 and 2020? Like, did they just kind of like,
WWE just WWE developed their own. So first they kind of talk about it. WWE went from OVW and then transitioned to FCW for to do the same thing pretty much. And then eventually you get NXT and they open their own performance center. So they no longer have need for these small indie companies to farm talent. They now can just build them in their own performance center now.
I see. So it's and this happens oftentimes with any sort of like monopolies or the biggest people at the top of the corporate ladder, if you will. They essentially snuff out all of the competition. And obviously, I'm a fan of what WWE does, but there's just something about the underdog, scrappy story of these. Like, I mean, dude, if we're being real, it's in smack in the middle of Oxycontin Express, Kentucky. Like, is that where it is, or is it Ohio? Where
It's
was?
in like no, yeah, so Ohio Valley, so I guess that the general region, but it's I think they said it's in Louisville.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And Kentucky is just one of those places that's been ravaged by drug use, and it's really like a sad area. And to see all of these people that have like kind of turned their life around as a result of finding this thing that it's honestly not lucrative. I think I heard them say like at some point they're getting paid like a couple $100
No, I
for a
mean
match or
like there's
something.
people working, a majority of the people, it seems, at least a handful, uh at least five people on there like work at the local Holiday Inn.
Yeah. Yeah. And they just do it because they love it. And a parallel that I drew is like cosplayers. There's this just enthusiastic group of people right here in Pensacola that have found an outlet for their creativity and some sense of purpose out of dressing up like pop culture
Mm-hmm.
characters. And you can't help but kind of like, it's wholesome. You can't help but appreciate it for what it is. And I don't know, maybe I can relate it a little bit to YouTube. Like, I've been doing YouTube for a long time. I don't get paid for it, but it's something that I found that kind of like gives me purpose outside of the day to day, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean there's definitely this sense of like this is something that will eventually if I play my cards right, get me to a bigger stage. But that like there's so many people in that company that are just like they're journeymen pretty much, they've traveled the roads but never really got anywhere with it. Like there are people in their late 30s, mid 40s who are just like, look, this is just what I still do.
Yeah. And what do you think about the guy? What's his name? Al Snow, right?
Al Snow, yeah.
Was he somebody that you're familiar with from wrestling, I assume?
I'm familiar with Al Snow from some wrestling. Obviously, he wrestled a bit before I really started watching
Mm.
WWE. But I was fully aware of his character. I think they overhype him a touch, just a bit. I like Al Snow. He was
WWE
definitely,
legend Al Snow.
yeah, like and sure, like he, I would agree he's a legend, but I think there's a couple people that are like, oh, he's one of the greatest of all time. Like, no, Al Snow was great. He was a great worker. He put in some great matches, but like, I with full respect to Al Snow, I love Al Snow, and he's trained people all over the world. One of my favorite guys on the Indies and on YouTube is Simon Miller, and I know he trained that guy, but just they hype him up a whole lot, and I'm like, yeah, he's great, but calm down.
Have you gone and watched any other stuff since the documentary?
So because of this documentary, I watched another documentary series that's on Apple Plus
Okay.
called Monster Factory, and I think I prefer Monster Factory over Wrestlers.
Talk to
It's
me. How
like
come?
it's not about a company per se. It's not like a indie company. They put on shows, but Monster Factory is a school. It's for
Okay.
people to develop and work on their craft and get started in the business. And it just does. It's so much more lighthearted. I think like sure, there's people that have their troubles, but it highlights how the Monster Factory and how professional wrestling like made them better. Like it shows one dude who he's like, growing up, I just had crippling anxiety. I hated going to school. I never had friends over. I didn't go to anyone's house. I just wanted to be by myself in my room. And then he's like, and then when I first got my car, first thing I did is I drove up to the Monster Factory, and just now you just see his wrestling character, and he's this like outgoing, eccentric dude. It talks about one girl who just was going through a bunch of shit after her mom died. She decided to try wrestling. Boom, just brought her out of her shell. It's just stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And like
Okay.
the first episode starts with a girl who she's like, I started training here when I was 15. I'm now like 22. And it just talks about her journey. And then the end of the episode is her going like, I got a WWE tryout and I got accepted.
Are these people maybe less white trash than the people on the wrestlers?
I think that's probably fair.
Yeah, I think, dude, I grew up in a very rural area, and it's amazing how much like I am. I don't want to say like from a privileged upbringing, but we went from being like lower middle class, maybe upper lower class, to being like middle class within the time period from when I was born to when I was 18 or whatever. So our living situation dramatically changed. But that said, I lived in an area where there were a lot of people that really reminded me of some of the people from the wrestlers documentary, to the point that I found them kind of endearing. Like, yeah, it wasn't so much about overcoming social anxiety for a lot of them as it was like overcoming their addiction to the pipe, or like getting
Right.
out of jail, like kind of crazy stuff. And I was like, these people are really rough and tumble. I don't imagine that like John Cena or Brock Lesnar came from that kind of upbringing. And I wonder if that's what holds a lot of them there in this indie circuit, as opposed to being able to like raise up to being
I mean,
something,
there's definitely something about that like attitude and all that. I mean, that's why a lot of people just didn't make it in like the early 2000s. And there's one dude on there on Wrestlers who's like in his like he's like 36 years old, and he's like, I've had enhancement matches in every big company. I worked in TNA. I had a match in WWE, and there's probably a reason that they looked at him and were like, yeah, thank you for that. We don't need you anymore. Uh, but and like I know the girl Haley J, she's like one of the main characters on there. She either just had or is about to have a WWE tryout.
oh, that's awesome.
And but you look at her on that show, and I can tell that this show was recorded at least a year and a half ago. And I'm like, I hope you got some shit cleaned up. since then, because if you are going into a WWE tryout with the attitude and the just your all around aura that you have in this, you're not getting it.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, just to document the amount of defiance that she has against authority is like that's gonna make it really tough for
Mm-hmm.
people to want, like, when they know you're just gonna go out the back door and fire up your weed and like
Right.
just flagrantly be
And there's
mad when
there's a
somebody
girl in that
says something
episode,
about it.
yeah. There's a girl in that episode that's like, I don't wrestle anybody who's on anything. And
Yeah.
I'm like, as much as I fully believe like legalize weed, decriminalize weed, there's no problem with marijuana. It's the same thing as alcohol, pretty much, except safer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want anybody if I'm working, if I'm doing something where, the job is to make it look like I'm hurting somebody, but not actually hurting somebody. I don't want to be in the ring with somebody who is inebriated in any way.
Yeah.
And they're going to look at shit like that. And if she's still doing that for her, around the time of her WWE tryout, they're not going to have it.
It seems like maybe in the 1970s, maybe in the 80s, maybe in the early 90s, a lot of that shit would fly. And like there probably were people who were drunk in
Oh
the
yeah.
ring. And, when you hear uh, uh, Undertaker talk about a lot of
Mm-hmm.
these stories from back in the day versus now, there is a level of professionalism now. There is a level of like, and I've seen it happen in a lot of different industries, like music, for example. Like a lot of musicians used to be real fuck ups. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you're aware of that, and it feels like a lot of their actors. You look at old Robert Downey Jr. versus new Robert Downey Jr.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was a cleaning up in the system, and the bar has raised. It's like now you don't only have to be a genius or brilliant in whatever your field is, you have to actually be like a responsible human being.
Right.
And it speaks to what you're saying. Like if the bar has been raised and everybody all of a sudden is like super professional, you don't want to be brought down by the person that isn't. I liked what was her Hollywood
Yeah.
as a character in this series. But yeah, to your point, I don't know how somebody like that works within a better system. And you might
Yeah.
be the biggest fish in a very small pond, but once you put her against, anybody in developmental in WWE, is she great anymore, or is she just
Right. Is she
really
just one of the fish in the
mediocre?
pond?
Yeah.
Yeah. And she has an attitude that reminds me of a guy named Enzo Amore. She says in the show, she's like, because she's having like an argument with her boyfriend, and he's like, you need to learn when to stop being Hollywood Haley J and just be whatever her name is, Haley Grace, whatever. Like, be Haley Grace at home and be Hollywood Haley J in the ring. And she's like, well, then you're in the wrong relationship because I'm Hollywood Haley J all the time. And there was a dude in WWE a handful of years ago named Enzo Amore, one of the best promos of the time. I wanted to go to Monday Night Raw just so I could participate in his promo. He would like have the crowd singing along with it. I'm not talking like a Seth Rollins singing his theme song. I mean, he came out with just these like catchphrases and introduction for himself and his tag team partner that the crowd would just the whole thing would repeat it back with him.
Mm.
And one time, like somebody cut his microphone off. And so he was like, oh, I'm just going to act like I have a microphone. He acted like he has a microphone, and the whole crowd did the promo for him.
It's pretty
He
sweet.
was that good. And I tell like can't hype it up enough. He was amazing. However, he fully bought into his own shit, and it made everybody hate him. He was like, his whole thing was he was like, my name is Enzo Amore. I'm a certified G and a bona fide stud. And like he would walk around with that attitude 24/7, and people were like, hey, turn it off. And he never turned it off. And what happened to him? Dude got fired for other reasons, but that didn't help.
Yeah. So is even that to me, like conversations we've had about kayfabe, like that almost used to be the expectation. If you're a
Mm-hmm.
heel, you're a heel in and out of the ring, when you're talking to press, when you're meeting fans, all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, there is clearly a separation now, and you just can't walk around being an asshole. People don't respond well to that. Another thing that comes up in the wrestler, and I'm gonna check out the Apple Plus series. Tell me what it's called again.
Monster Factory.
Yeah, I'm gonna
And in
check out
fact,
Monster Factory.
one of the dudes from Monster Factory was in the same tryout class as Haley J. And and feeling pretty confident that he has a good shot of going into NXT.
Were you familiar with Women of Wrestling?
Slightly, yes. Especially this new reincarnated version. I've never watched it, but CM Punk's wife, AJ Lee, she was in WWE for a while. She was really good. She helped sort of get WoW on its feet or back on its feet in the past few years.
I've thought it was interesting. I looked up a little bit of stuff on that. And, you know, there's something to me about just loving the underdog story in the context of sports. And so, like, I would love to see OVW end up being it's not going to compete with
No,
AEW or Impact or WWE, but at least to put eyes
turn a
on it.
profit.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there is some endearing elements of it that made me just like, it would be cool if they, exactly what you said, if they could just keep themselves afloat, because they do seem to have like a loyal cult following.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some, you know, I'm being both disparaging and positive about it at the same time. It kind of reminds me, and especially the Haley J section of it, it kind of reminds me of like Jerry Springer. I think there was an element of WWE even in Jerry Springer. Like, you went there with an expectation that
Back in the
you're
90s, definitely.
probably
Yeah.
going to start throwing chairs at some point. Yeah, like absolutely back in the 90s.
Well, I mean, they have the whole storyline in this of her real life drama with her mom and how they sort of use that to feed into their emotion in the ring whenever they have like a match together. So
What was it
that
called?
Jerry Springer is definitely there.
Yeah. Was it a death match? What were
Yeah,
they
they had a
selling
death
it
match.
as?
It was a death match. At one point, a dude said it was a first blood match, and I'm like, okay, well, there's blood immediately, so he was wrong. But it was just a death
Yeah.
match.
Yeah. They get tossed
That shit,
onto thumbtacks.
she pulled out like plastic wiffle ball bats with tacks taped to it, and she starts hitting her in the thighs, and that was already bad enough. And I'm watching this at work in the break room on my iPad, and I just exclaimed in the middle of the break room, "Bitch!" because she hits her mom in the head with it. She hits her mom in the
Yes.
head with it, and then it gets like tangled in her hair, and she just starts
That was
pulling
the
at it.
part when she goes to pull it out and the hair's all
Mm-hmm.
wrapped up in it. And I'm just like, no.
Yeah, I was like, stop it.
It's there is also this really sometimes dark undercurrent to a lot of what we're seeing in these matches. And I have spoken with you about it, but one of the first times I ever had that feeling is when we were watching WrestleMania, I think, and it was the Finn Balor versus Edge
Yeah.
match, and he hit him in the head with the ladder. And I just like, it went from feeling like this is really enjoyable to like tying up the knots in my stomach.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that they edited the wrestlers together almost express that not only are you, the audience, feeling that, but also the people behind the scenes are feeling that.
There was a big one in the 90s, I remember, with The Rock and Mankind, where The Rock has Mankind handcuffed, hands behind his back, defenseless. And The Rock's the Mankind's family is in the audience, and he's in there handcuffed, hands behind his back, and The Rock just starts swinging a chair at his head. This also sucks, like, you know, knowing what we now know about like CTE and shit. There's a reason they didn't do chair shots in WWE anymore. But Mankind's handcuffed, The Rock, chair shot to the head, 12 times.
Oh my God.
12. And then like the whole time his wife is just in the audience, like, God damn it. Like, and I think the crowd even starts to go like, this is too much.
Uh-huh. There was one video that you showed me. I think it was Dominic Mysterio getting freaking hit with a kendo stick by Seth Rollins over and over. Does that sound right? Like they put him to a post and were hitting him with a kendo stick?
That was the Hell in a Cell match between New Day and the Usos. Yeah, Usos, he was handcuffed sort of, but he was like hanging from the outside ring post. So his just whole torso is just exposed, and they just start wailing them with kendo sticks.
Yeah. You know, and we'll switch gears here in a moment, but a lot of the videos that you have suggested for me to watch are like very clean wrestling matches. And I I guess I like the extreme stuff. You know, who doesn't have some element of themselves that just loves watching like gladiatorial combat where
Mm,
there's like high stakes and stuff like that. But at some point, it leaves the realm of athleticism and just turns into sadism or masochism or something
yeah.
like that. And I'm not sure, 100% how I feel about that a lot of times. But yeah, that match in the wrestlers was really interesting, and I love that towards the last end of the penultimate episode, the episode before the finale, we see Al himself preparing to get back in the
Mm,
ring, and he's
just
going
training.
through the training montage and shit. And that,
Looks like Batman and Batman v Superman.
yeah, yeah,
Remember he's the way he's like
absolutely.
hitting the tire and like pulling he's just like jacked Ben Affleck. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It was cool to see him get back in the ring for what, wasn't I wouldn't say like huge fireworks of a match, but there were some pretty cool spots and a lot of clotheslines.
Mhm.
But what
The
are you going
dude
to
who
do?
I want to see succeed from that is I want to see that Shearer guy
I
get
wanted to
something.
talk about him, so I'm glad you brought him up. Why him?
He just seems like the one dude there who's like super pure of heart and is just like, I just know that this is what I'm meant to do, and I'm not going home until I am successful.
I was watching the first episode and I was telling Victoria, I'm like, that fucking Mexican dude is jacked. If there's anybody that could join the WWE just aesthetically, it's that Mexican dude. For like 2 or 3 episodes till we finally get introduced to him. It's like, no, he's not Mexican at all. But
Yeah, he's Indian.
I kept noticing this guy in the back, and I'm like, he has the physique, he has the looks. That's the other thing is like to get on WWE, oftentimes you have
Mm-hmm.
to be like aesthetically pleasing as well. And a
Yeah.
lot of the people in the wrestlers may or may not be. I don't want to say, but
Well, and he said he got to WWE developmental and then they fired him. And there was a time a few years ago where WWE was really trying to break into India, and it was not working. And I'm guessing that's probably when around the time they hired him. And then once it was just sort of falling through and they weren't really breaking any ground in India, they still have a handful of Indian dudes on payroll, but I'm guessing that's probably when they fired him.
that's unfortunate. I agree with what you're saying about him seeming to be really earnest and pure of heart, especially when he's talking to the camera. But the way that he was engaging with other wrestlers, I found to be a little bit cringe at times. Like after they were kind of finished the match where he ended up losing the title, which it kind of shows about the emotional effect that holding versus losing a title has on people. But he like grabbed his fucking opponent by the throat, like jokingly. But I can't imagine a lot of that shit flying in the locker room where people will tolerate like it was some weird energy, dude.
I
Did
don't know. I
you know
didn't
what I'm
catch
talking
that.
about? Okay, okay. It was little, but I felt to more broadly speaking that he spoke very different to the cameraman than he did to his fellow wrestlers. However, you could see he had a lot of admiration for Al, and just like the way that Al became this like father figure and mentor to all of these people, he's almost like I guess that a father figure.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I thought that was kind of touching, but I wanted to ask you, you probably have better insight than me. Do you have to talk exactly like Vince McMahon to run like a wrestling stable?
This has bothered me for years, and it's not just him. It's so many people from that generation, I guess any generation pre like 2005, 2002, even maybe. Just so many people of that era and those decades who are now older all talk like this or in a really low voice or something like this. And
Yeah.
and I think it's just genuinely from being of an era where a promo you had to be yelling a lot and you had to be like you're already kind of like increasing your voice, but then you're yelling about it. And so it's I think they've just fucked up their voices because HBK has it, Shawn Michaels has it, Triple H has it. Like the only dudes from that era who I can think of who don't have it is like Kevin Nash, and that's because his character was so laid back. But even like I listened to like old RVD, Rob Van Dam promos, and he just sounds like a dude. And now if you go listen to an RVD interview, he talks like that. And I'm like, what the fuck happened to all of your vocal cords? And it's just, I think it's just years of yelling in promos.
You did a pretty good impression of it. Let me see if I can.
That's
Let me
just
see
they
if I
all
can
talk
pull
like
it
that
off.
now. It freaking bothers me.
All right. Well, that's our thoughts on the wrestlers. Y'all let us know what your thoughts are down in the comments section. And if you've checked out the one on Apple Plus, let us know your thoughts on that one as well. If you haven't, head over there and check it out. Maybe we'll talk about it on an upcoming video. Peace.